When the powers that be wish to circumvent the U.S. Constitution and stomp on your rights, they do it either through an executive order or international treaties. I strongly encourage you to investigate this issue thoroughly. Prior to the Federal Department of Education, America had the finest schools in the world. Since this disastrous and unconstitutional grab for power, we can all see that $250 billion a year will not fix our schools, and they continue to decline faster than the feds or states can shovel money into them. Even if a direct tax were necessary, only by keeping it at its lowest possible percentage would it ever benefit this nation. Quote, "The point now emphasized is that the evil effects of high surtaxes fall not upon the individual whose income is seized and taken, but ultimately almost entirely upon the mass of the people who are thereby deprived of the benefits which would result from the free flow of commercial transactions and the use of the additional capital which would be available for productive enterprise. The revenues to be obtained by the government from this class of taxes depends upon transactions in trade and commerce which bring about income available for payment of taxes. It is highly desirable, in the interest of the production of revenue, that the volume of business transactions giving rise to gain shall be as great as possible, and to this end it is essential that the natural laws of trade and commerce and the free flow of business shall not be interfered with or prevented. But the direct effect of these very high taxes is to hinder and prevent business transactions which would otherwise take place. A man may have property which he has held for years and which has greatly increased in value, and he would like to sell it. But if he does, a large part of the gain would have to be paid out in taxes. He would rather keep the property than sell it, pay the tax, and invest what is left in something else. At the same time, the party desiring to buy this property, if he obtained it, would improve it with buildings. What is the result? The transaction does not take place, and the community loses the advantage which would come in the stimulation that would arise from the transactions resulting from the buyer's improvement of the property, and it also loses the advantage of the seller's putting his money into some other form of investment, which in turn would give rise to business transactions. The same thing on a much greater scale is true in manufacturing and mercantile lines. Men have built up enterprises to the point where they're highly successful. They would like to take their profit and turn the business over to younger men to carry on. These transactions are highly desirable not only for the parties, but for the community. Yet they are absolutely stopped because, if made, the seller would have to pay in 1 year a tax on a gain which has been the result of perhaps the better part of a lifetime of effort. And in all such cases the government gets no tax, whereas if the rates were reasonable, the transactions would take place and the government's revenues would benefit accordingly. The free interchange of property and business transactions is essential to the normal prosperity of the country, and each such transaction has a direct tendency to bring about others of like character, with the result of increasing the amount of gain or income available for transaction. But when the tax is so high as to act as a deterrent against usual and desirable business transactions, and the volume of such transactions is thereby lessened, the inevitable result is for the tax to become less and less productive. It is for these reasons that, particularly in the higher brackets, a lower tax rate will produce more revenue in the long run than excessive rates. So long as a high rate stands in the way of accomplishing bargains and sales, the government receives no tax, but at a lower rate the transactions proceed and the government shares in the profits. End of this excerpt. Today, Americans are being fleeced to the tune of approximately 52% of every dollar going for local, state, and federal taxes. The day is rapidly approaching when making even $1,000 an hour will not be enough to survive. How much longer are the people of this nation going to put up with this state of affairs? We say enough is enough. Our founding fathers, who believed in private property ownership and didn't believe the little man should be taxed to death, are probably spinning in their graves at what's been taking place against we the people. A pioneer on the withholding issue. Vivian Kellums was a woman before her time who knew the grand theft taking place against the working man's paycheck. And for more information on this incredible woman, I also have a website that I keep in memory of Vivian Kellums. It is www.viviankellums.com. The following excerpt is from pages 41 through 46 of her book, Toil, Taxes, and Trouble, published in 1952, and she is right on point. Quote, "Since a capitation means a tax of the same amount for every person, this provision makes doubly sure that all federal taxes must be at the same uniform rate for everybody. This limitation that direct taxes be levied by the federal government must be in proportion to a census and apportioned among the states in accordance with numbers, is the only provision in the Constitution that is stated twice. The only reason that our Constitution required a census to be taken every 10 years was to count the people to determine how many representatives should go to Congress and how direct taxes should be levied. I wonder how many Americans thought of this in 1950 when those little busybodies came knocking on their doors, asking 10,000 impudent, silly questions which were none of their or Washington's business. There is absolutely no power granted in the Constitution which enables a top-heavy bureaucracy of empty-headed simpletons and worse to invade the privacy of the American people in such a monstrous manner. This census is just a preview of what is really in store for us if they actually take over, which they most certainly will do unless we uproot and vote them out. The census was to count the people, and that was all. The number of people determined the number of representatives in Congress and the apportionment of direct taxes among the states. For a long time I asked myself, why were representatives and direct taxes linked together and apportioned among the states in accordance with population? It was understandable that representatives should be chosen in accordance with numbers, but why should taxes be apportioned the same way? And then one day, out of the blue, it came to me crystal clear. All at once I understood the plan to safeguard the future freedom of the nation, conceived and executed by those scholarly men. I read again, representatives and direct taxes shall be included within this union according to their respective numbers. No capitation or other direct tax shall be laid unless in proportion to the census of enumeration hereinbefore directed to be taken. And in those two sentences, our forefathers bound fast the hands of Congress and secured the liberty and freedom of the American people. How? By making it utterly impossible to levy an income tax. An income tax is certainly a direct tax, probably the most direct tax of all, since it cannot be shifted but must be paid by the person receiving the income. By specifying that direct taxes must be levied in accordance with the number of people, not upon what they produced, as in the days of ancient Egypt, an income tax was simply out of the question. It cannot be levied upon a man, but must be levied upon what he receives. Our forefathers designed and incorporated in the Constitution a new system of government. It was built upon a revolutionary idea, the conviction that the government belonged to the people and existed only by their consent. Its genius lay in the careful system of checks and balances along with the three departments, the legislative, the executive, and the judicial. And it went further and maintained a balance between the powers of the individual states and the federal government. In addition, it carefully reserved to the states and to the people all rights and powers not specifically delegated or prohibited to the federal government, and further stated that because certain rights were enumerated in the Constitution, it did not mean that others not mentioned were still not the property of the people.